Howdy, folks! Happy Wednesday, happy Hump Day. We have things to discuss. It is official, and I think everybody knows what I'm talking about. We'll talk about that, and we'll look at a few teams in the Atlantic Division who are intriguing. But we'll start off with the pre-show. Go ahead, Russ.
So let's talk about the NFL because everybody wants to talk about the NHL and how they should soldier on and everything else. And let's talk about what soldiering on looks like in the NFL. So, yesterday for the Redskins, a guy who was on the practice squad for 4 or 5 days was the starting quarterback.
Washington football team.
Yeah. Thank you. Was on the team for 4 or 5 days. He was the starting quarterback. The Jets just lost their coach to COVID. There's over 120 players in COVID protocol. These last few weeks are critical for the playoffs. They're not going to stop, and they're going to get probably some strange result out of it. And that's what the other side of it looks like to me. That's what happens if you don't do anything about it.
Well, I mean, yeah, Nick Mullins starting for Cleveland.
Yep.
In a key game, and Gilbert, quarterback for Washington, I guess he's the son of Gail Gilbert, the former Bill and San Diego Charger back in the 90s. Yes, and it's sort of indiscriminate because you don't know who you're going to lose. I know have the Bills lost Cole Beasley, who is a rather vociferous anti-vaxxer, very vocal on social media, and he's COVID positive, so he's going to be out for the biggest game of the year. And he points out, from his point of view, I mean, this is something that I'm sure the anti-vax crowd in the NFL have a problem with. He's asymptomatic, but he's positive, but because he's unvaccinated, he can't play. But right now, the NFL is saying if you're vaccinated and you're asymptomatic, you can play. So there is a split there, and it's the politics of vaccination in any professional sport right now is really complicated.
Yeah, it is interesting that Russ brought up about the number of coaches. It is surprising how many coaches that we have. Although if you watch them in game action, you understand why. They're all constantly pulling down their mask to talk to people. And what's interesting about that is what I always read about that is as well, they're trying to talk to people. I just got back from the doctor's office where everyone was masked. Mm-hmm. And I was in an office talking with a medical professional for 35 minutes. We were 7 or 8 feet apart. We both were wearing masks, and neither one of us had any difficulty hearing one another. So I don't understand why they always feel they have to pull their mask down. Yeah. I think they do it for emphasis, to be honest with you. Yeah, sure. I think when the ref comes over, they pull it down. They want them to show that they're serious about, what they're about to say. So, they could do more than they're doing to help prevent the spread of all this. But, it's becoming, I don't know that there's ever been anything like this where, there's so many. I saw that Frank Saravelli had 18% of the players. The Red Wings had 2 every day here in Detroit with people that are getting it. And, I'm talking to someone who knows a little bit more about it than I do, who said that it's one of the most transmissible viruses that he's ever seen or witnessed. And it doesn't take long, a matter of seconds, and you could be pick it up. And I feel sorry for even though it's been milder than some of the other strains. If you're unvaccinated, you're still vulnerable, and if it's that transmissible, I know somebody I heard on television saying if you're unvaccinated, it is going to find you.
Yeah, 140 times more transmissible than the original COVID strain, the alpha, I guess they would call it. But the thing is about the NFL. Okay, the Bills have a big game against the New England Patriots this Sunday. There was some speculation. Cole Beasley is best buddies with Josh Allen. Their wives or girlfriends are best buddies, so they spend a lot of time together. And now Beasley is positive. And going into this game, what is to stop Josh Allen even if he's feeling symptomatic, if the NFL is not testing players who are asymptomatic, and he says, I don't have any symptoms, what is to stop him from playing or lie about feeling sick? Because it's a big game. That's the hole in the system here, Jan. I mean, because right now I think players, if there's that out in the NFL, they're probably going to play sick.
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, it's kind of the out, right? If you look, the Jets today, I think, put 15 guys on the COVID list, including their coach. Right, Robert Saleh just hit the list today. I think Michael Carter hit. There's a handful of other guys that have hit, right? And all of these, I guess, are being tested because there is some form of symptoms, or in an abundance of caution, they're testing people even if they are asymptomatic, right? And this is the Twitter argument that's gone on. This is the argument that's been on the thread, on the comments, and everywhere else, right? Where should the limit be of testing, especially if the cases are minimal? And as Russ said yesterday, right, the key is not so much only the athletes, right? It's everybody else associated with the athletes. It's the people in the arena. It's the ticket takers. It's the coach. It's the GM. It's the external families other than the athletes that could potentially be impacted above and beyond the booster. I mean, we're dealing with it in my community with our synagogue in terms of trying to figure out policy and practices, and my daughter's school's trying to figure it out. And, you know, my daughter hopefully supposed to go overseas. Holland right now is technically shut down until mid-January. They still plan on having the semester, but all these are factors that people need to figure out that until about, 18 months ago, none of us viewed as being a factor or something we need to even consider given where we are. And the variant, I mean, Delta was clearly a much more milder version, but as we've talked about, as you said, Mike, the virus learns, right? And it becomes transparent and becomes transmittable, associated with other methodologies that we didn't think about originally. So regardless of how many different vaccines you're going to get, they're going to have to figure out, okay, what's going to be practices and protocols, not now, but figuring out 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and 12 months down the road when the variant changes all over again.
Yeah, they have over 200 cases right now. And that's in the last hour they've mentioned that. So in the NFL.
Yeah.
In the NFL, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, 53-man rosters plus practice squads for 32 teams. That's over 1,500 players. That's, you know. All right, let's get started. Hello, Hockey World. Today is Wednesday, December 22nd, 2021.
I'm Jan Levine.
I'm Russ Cohen from Sportsology.
Kevin Allen, Hockey Buzz.
And I'm Michael Agello, and this is the HockeyBuzzcast here on HockeyBuzz.com. All right, the announcement came at 10 a.m. Didn't surprise anybody, but it's official. Now the NHL will not be not sending players to the Beijing Olympics. There are no outs here. They can't, players like it was rumored in 2018 that Alex Ovechkin wanted to go and basically take a leave of absence and go to Pyeongchang. That is not allowable. Any NHL player cannot go to the Olympics. So, Kev, I mean, not a surprise. Over the last week or 10 days, I think it was a foregone conclusion that it was going to happen. There are some players like Connor Hellebuck, and I just read Nicholas Backstrom, who are pissed off and thinking this is a joke that they're not going, but there are reasons for them not going.
Well, yeah. I mean, it still is very complicated, and you say we're not surprised. I'm surprised that it reached this point. Like, I thought there was no chance that they wouldn't go because they had fought so hard to get this right. But that's how dire, maybe that's too strong a word, but that's how, the fact that it's so serious is what it took for us to cancel that. I mean, otherwise players wouldn't give it up. I mean, the idea that they might have to quarantine 3 to 5 weeks was just not appealing to a lot of them. I've heard that the European players in particularly are disappointed by this ruling. Right. I know I had talked to Pius Suter of the Red Wings about it, and this was about a week before the decision was made, and he said he had no problems going over, and he didn't know what everyone else was going to do, but he had talked to, I think, some of his teammates and wasn't concerned about it. So I think the European community views it a little bit differently. What is interesting to me is with regard to how everybody feels about it. Hellebuck has taken a little heat for his what some people have called tone deaf talk about how that the NHL is overreacting. And you mentioned Backstrom. Steve Eisenman, who I've mentioned so often, can essentially walk. Fans in Detroit view him as being able to walk on water. He he can do no wrong in this city, but he earned the ire of numerous fans by talking about the issue of whether or not a player, if he's asymptomatic, should even be tested. And especially in the medical community here in Michigan, they were not pleased with Eisman over that discussion, even though he pointed out he was entering a political arena. And essentially, I think he was just sort of raising the debate. But that was enough to cause the medical community here to get upset about it. And as I said, the fan base here thinks he can do no wrong. So the fact that he's sort of stepped in it as well just speaks to, how much debate there is over what should be done. And the fact that you couldn't even get 100%. I mean, we've talked about this 50 games canceled, the potential of them not getting a full season's paycheck yet again. All was out there. I mean, that had so much to do with the decision here, the desire to get those games replayed, the difficulty that would take to get it done without that use of the 3-week break. And yet there's still players that are unhappy about it. I think it's probably a small percentage. I think the majority felt that enough's enough. Let's just play the season.
Well, what I want to know, Russ, and I don't think we got any kind of clarity from the statement that came from both the NHLPA and the NHL, is did the NHL institute the clause in the CBA that said if there is?
They definitely did.
So in the end they were the bad guy in this. So
because that's why Donald Fear's statement was kind of like we really wanted to, and the COVID really just took over, and we have to make up these games, and this is just what we have to do.
Yeah, I don't know that they did invoke it. I don't know.
Oh, you don't think so?
I don't know. Is the real answer?
Okay.
Because I really haven't investigated that. But I think Gary Bettman said to Donald Fear, essentially, we're talking two different things, just the technical aspect of it.
Yeah.
I think he said to Donald, we have to get these games replayed, and we need those 3 weeks. I mean, I don't know what you guys are thinking, but I know everybody wants to get paid for 82 games, and we want the revenue from those 82 games, although they may not get it, depending on what Canada does.
Well, Fear's statement was a complete sympathetic statement to hey, sorry fans, and it's like, the NHL doesn't get to give a statement like that. They don't.
Jan, it's almost like if that is the case, if this was an agreement between the two sides, the way the statements were crafted, it's almost like the NHL said to the PA, you know what? We didn't want to go, so we'll take the PR hit for not going. We'll say because it was a material breach or whatever, and we have to make up these games, so we're not going. But I think that there were a sizable amount of players, Jan, that didn't want to go after a certain point.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it a little bit yesterday. We talked, again, the NHL was clear in terms of the way Bettman was framing it last week that they prefer not to go, right? They kept saying that, pretty much it was implicit without saying it explicitly that the players, we agreed to this in the CBA, therefore we have to give me a question about what's going on. We have to give them the right to go is pretty much how they said it, that, hey, I don't want you to go, but I'm not going to tell you not to go, but we're going to imply that we don't want you to go. And ultimately now they've now made the decision that, hey, we're not going to go. And we said yesterday, they're taking the hit, right? They're being quote unquote the heavy, makes the players look a little bit better in the public eye. They are going to get criticism from guys like Hellebuck and others who do want to go. But as you said, I think there's probably a large portion of players that don't want to go, yet they've been the minority necessarily in terms of talking out. It's been the ones who saying they do want to go that's been a bit more prominent and kind of highlighted in the media overall.
Now,
I mean, let me phrase it this way. If the players hadn't agreed with this decision or weren't willing to do this, there would have been a much greater uproar, and Donald Fear would have done everything. They were totally willing to go along with this. So in the end, it doesn't really matter whose decision it was. And, I always feel obliged to bring this up because there's general confusion out there about the league and why weren't they moving on this quicker. And let me remind everyone, under the perfect circumstances, the league's owners and Gary Bettman do not want to send players to the Olympics.
Right.
They don't want it at all, whether it's COVID or not COVID. So,
Right.
This is something they would have wanted right from the beginning, but the COVID obviously created the environment. But they wanted to fulfill their obligation to him. And now we're talking about sending players in 2020 and 2026.
Right, and that's in Italy, and the time difference won't be as drastic as it was in Pyeongchang or in Beijing. They'd be playing. I mean, they would have tried to schedule games that would have been in mornings and afternoons, but the time difference was always difficult. I mean, Kev, I remember in '98 in Nagano, watching the Canada Czech Republic game. I think it was at 1:00 in the morning when the shootout happened between Dominik Hasek and the Canadians. So but that being said, we know, okay, so now that is not happening. The interesting thing now is how the NHL is going to reorganize things when they said it's over 50 games right now that need to be rescheduled. You have the 3 weeks that the Olympics would have, when the Olympic break. Some days are not available in some buildings because they had scheduled concerts and things of that nature, but there are open dates. The interesting thing, you mentioned Canada, Kev. Right now, Montreal cannot have fans. They're talking about Montreal. They only have one postponed game against. Well, actually, no, they have none. But what they're going to do supposedly is move games that are in January where fans cannot be allowed to February when fans might be allowed, so that they can get the revenue. There are some teams that haven't postponed any games, and they don't know whether they want those teams sitting dormant for 3 weeks. So you might have a massive reorganization of the schedule.
World Juniors is at 50% capacity right now for fans.
Alberta and Ontario are 50%. Yeah.
So you have to believe that wave is probably coming across Canada for at least a short while until things get under control. So I would imagine that's going to be the way for a while.
I'm sure BC and Manitoba will follow suit, and so they'll probably be at 50% capacity. But the way schedules were compacted after the Olympics were, I looked at Toronto. I think they were playing 32 games in 48 days. They've had 4 games postponed, and they were all 3 of the 4 were road games. So, that means that they're going to have to make those up during that 3-week period in February. They're saying there's going to be a week off during that break, and then they will schedule games around the other 2 weeks. And I think that's a good plan, but you're still going to have a really compacted schedule because unless they are planning on moving already scheduled games to different dates, and that's a cluster F, Kev, because I don't think fans are going to be extremely happy. Like a game that they were supposed to go on March 17th, all of a sudden now it's February 10th.
Well, a couple of things on this. First of all, I think it is a good plan. The idea of give everybody a week off. Also, I think that gives everyone a chance to clear their COVID cases, keep people away from the rink,
right?
That kind of thing. But again, I brought this up on another show where I had a conversation with the general manager, and he said, we always view this in the way we always view hockey, but there's nothing stopping us from playing 5 games in 7 nights. Like we can't do that. And he said, maybe it would sort of change that. Baseball plays every day because that's their tradition. And, they play and, they're at the same risk of injury as we are, other than they don't have physical contact. He said, but, our athletes, some of them only play 15, 16 minutes a game. They play 20-some sessions. So could they play 5 times a week? The answer is probably yes. They probably could. So, it's just a question of what we're willing to endure. But he said we can find a way to get them all in, but we just have to think outside the box. And he said you will find people on both sides of that argument about whether or not it would make the hockey, less. Not quite the quality that we would expect. So we
have some breaking news too.
Go ahead.
Looks like Bobby Ryan's going to play for Burns selection at the Spengler Cup. So maybe he'll be warmed up for the Olympics at that point.
Well, he said he had apparently yesterday he was asked whether he would be interested in playing for the U.S. in Beijing, and he said yes. So he said, I mean, again, I think I mentioned Brian Giunta a couple shows ago. That's what he did in 2018. I think he was retired or unsigned, and he ended up going to Pyeongchang. Now the thing is, Pierre LeBrun wrote a piece about, and the question was asked, which players are going to represent the countries, and we talked about the Spengler Cup or Channel One Cup rosters, but also he said John Van Beesbroek of USA Hockey said AHL players would be an option, and NCAA and European League players would be an option. But the thing is, with NCAA players or AHL players, they would have to get the permission of their team and the team probably that drafted them. Like, for example, like I don't think the Sabres would sign off on Owen Power going to Beijing.
They don't have any discussion.
They don't have a contract with them. That's right.
It's Michigan, and Michigan's not going to sign off on that.
Right.
They're expecting to get some NCAA players. I do know that. The problem we're having, there's a great story, and I think it was trying to think. Simon Schemberg tweeted it, who's the former IIHF official, where the Swedish players were quoted saying, "Why does everyone just assume we're going to be willing to go over there and play either? Like, what are we? That's fair. Nobody cares about our health and well-being and whether or not we have to quarantine for 3 to 5 weeks. Are you just willing to sacrifice us because you won't send your prime players there?" So he said, "Why should we go over and do that?" I thought it was a pretty fair comment.
The only thing I want to say to Kev is, you might be right. There may be some college players, but I can't imagine like Michigan will let 4 of their guys go.
There are going to be college players. There could be.
So is Michigan really going to let like 4 of their guys go?
Well, I don't know who they are. I just know when I had asked about it a couple of days ago, they were pretty confident they were going to get some college players. So.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see if they get the top ones. I don't know if they will.
Yeah, I have no idea who they are.
Yeah, fair enough.
But and now one other note, and again, that I have a particular disdain for the All-Star game, but again, I've learned after many discussions about this with Kevin and with Russ that it's not for me, and it's not the game itself. It's the promotional aspect of it, and advertisers and such. Well, the AHL just announced today that they are canceling their All-Star game that I think was going to be in Laval this year. Now it could be Russ because it was in Laval and it was in Quebec.
That's a big reason why.
Yeah, they couldn't have fans. But I'm just wondering now, Kev, will the next thing to fall be the All-Star game? Because we're talking about Vegas, and we're talking about that was going to be the exit point for players to go to Beijing. Whether now they'll say, okay, well, it's not going to be the exit point for Beijing, and really. Should we have an All-Star game when we're going to have a tough time getting the 82 games in?
Well, I think I've learned here that there are situations where the norm is not going to be embraced. I would normally, under normal circumstances, there's no way. Too much money has been committed. A lot of people are going to end up losing money if you cancel it at this juncture because it's so close to it. However, this is a different situation. I thought they would never back out of the Olympics. The players wouldn't, but the situation reached such that normal behavior was not accepted in terms of how people usually react. So I guess we have to say it is possible that they'll cancel it. And, as you pointed out, perhaps several $1 million will be lost, but they'll be able to recoup that by using those dates to play games. I mean, I don't know the answer to that because I'm not privy to, what kind of hoops they've got to jump through to play these extra games. You mentioned a lot of arenas are already filled up, and I know that they'll be resistant to try to play differently than when they have in the past with regard to playing 5 games in 7 days or things of that nature. But they could if they got desperate enough.
Yeah, Pierre LeBrun reported that Yeah, the Habs cannot have fans in the month of January at the Bell Center. So there might be an idea of rescheduling. I don't know how many home games they had scheduled in January at home, but they'll look to schedule as many of those games outside of January so they can have fans. So I mean that's that, and again, Russ, that's probably the reason why that All-Star game was canceled. So
yeah,
okay.
I'm pretty sure.
All right, so we talked about the Metro Division yesterday, and I just wanted to quickly look at a couple teams in the Atlantic before we focus on a couple of the teams at the top end of the division. We talked ad nauseum about Montreal and their problems. Ottawa has struggled. They have some good young players like Brady Tkachuk and Batherson and Thomas Chabot, but Russ, were you at the Ottawa game against Philly when they played Chabot 35 minutes?
Oh yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
Honestly, there is playing a player who's your best player a sizable amount of minutes, like Drew Doughty with LA back in the day. 35 minutes is an atrocity. It's like, I mean, my God, what are they doing?
He was at 23 minutes, like in the middle of the second period. But it was, what was bad about it is we talk about mental fatigue, and Chabot was skating great, but he also was on the ice for 2 goals. And you do wonder what the mental fatigue is in today's game if you're going to put that amount of minutes on somebody. And so I do feel, and some writers felt at that time, that that's exactly what Ottawa was doing to him. And it's not ideal. I mean, again, there has to be a cutoff on the coach's mind. Who's it, DJ Smith? There has to be a cutoff in his mind, like, hey, there's diminishing returns if I do this. I know my defense isn't great, but I'm going to have to trust somebody because, again, you just can't do this to a guy. But they are. And he's playing minutes like we used to see back in the old days with guys like Brian Leach and even older than that. And now we're back to that with some players.
Yeah, I'll bring up what I said last time when we discussed this. The late Bill Gadsby told me when I only played 30 minutes, I thought I had an off night.
Right.
So, they averaged, the top defenseman always averaged 35 plus minutes per game.
Buffalo, I think, has overachieved this year, and based on at least my projections, I thought they were going to be worst or second worst in the league. But Kevin Adams came out yesterday. I was on their media call, and in spite of, and this was a good thing, Russ, I don't think, based on what he said, they're not going to keep Luukkonen up. They're sticking with their development program, which I think means keeping Krebs and Quinn and Peterka and Samuelson down in the AHL.
Yep.
I'm sure they'll give them a taste at some point during the year, and they may have to if COVID hits the team. But in general, they're talking about not rushing these guys. And this is a throwaway season for them. They know it. I know it. You know it. But they're still playing better than anybody expected. The surprise team, and we've talked about them a lot, but Detroit is a surprise team right now, Kev. They're ahead of Boston. Boston's got 5 games in hand, but right now they're in 4th place in the division. They're really surprising people.
Well, I mean, they're better than they were, but Boston is still ahead of them in my mind, just because of all those games in hand. And the Red Wings haven't shown with this younger team that they can win on the road whatsoever. They have a terrible road record, and they really have not been the same team, on the road. But it's really all about Moritz Seider and Lucas Raymond and Nedeljkovic, and to a lesser extent Joe Veleno. All these guys have come in, and Seider and Raymond have been instant successes. They've been 2 of the probably top 5 players on the team. They play big minutes. Moritz Seider is just a remarkable defenseman. He can do so many different things on the ice, and he's really just scratching the surface of his offensive ability. I've brought this up before, but all of the points he has have just come from playing defense. And by that, I mean, generally when a player gets a lot of points when he's a younger player, he's got to take some risk, and he's got to move up into the zone and be the trailing defenseman. None of that from Seider. He stays up at the point. He's very careful not to put too much risk on, and yet he still just piled up the points. When you see his offensive skill is in overtime, when it's 3-on-3, suddenly, he's dipping and diving and skating, and you can see that he has some dynamic ability. So, I mean, this is a guy that's going to be a top scoring defenseman. He's going to hit. He's going to block shots. He's going to be an all-around defenseman. He's very, very good. So there's still a long way to go for the Rebels. Long way to go. But they're an improved team.
Kev, I saw a video of him. I don't know what game it was. It was probably in the last week where he's behind the net and the opposition forward is sort of like shadowing him, and he takes his hand off the stick and waves the guy to come behind the net. He's like goading the forechecker to come back behind the net, and then when the guy does, he goes the other way. I've never seen anybody do that before. That's supreme confidence for a 19, 20-year-old kid. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, but Blatchel always refers to it as the swagger. He has the swagger to his game. Very confident, and they treat him like a veteran. They look to him to bail them out when they're in trouble. The veterans will look to give him the puck. Very confident with the puck. Knows how to protect it. And Raymond, all of a sudden, the one thing I've noticed in the last 6 or 7 games, he's had 4 games where he has no shots on goal, but he had assists in that game because the teams are covering him now. He's shooting less and creating opportunities for others. And I think that ultimately will create some space for him as well, because they're going to have to respect that passing ability, which is also good. And then he'll get a little bit more room than he has. So I think he's adjusting a little bit.
Now, Tampa, they were the only game last night. I watched a lot of Tampa versus Vegas, and we've talked enough about them and about how they're playing so well without Kucherov and without Point. Stamkos had the game-winning goal on a one-timer halfway through the third period. But the reason that they won that game was Andrei Vasilevsky. He makes a stop on Chandler Stevenson where he walks right through the Tampa defense. And then in the last minute of regulation, he made 2 or 3 unbelievable stops. I mean, the great equalizer for any team is their goaltender. And like I said on Twitter, anybody who tells me that Andrei Vasilevsky is not the best goalie in the world, you're an idiot. Because
except Brian Elliott played in that game, Mike, because Vasilevsky took a shot that went to his chin. He had to come out of the game, and then Sergachev was smart enough to get a delay off the face-off, and Vasilevsky was able to get back in the game. So what's his name only played 3 seconds.
Okay.
But again, he took a shot that went under his mask. So it just shows you how tough Vasilevsky is too. The other thing about this game is, though, it's a little worrisome for Vegas, is they did have a lead, and Tampa was able to whittle away at that lead. I was happy to see Gabriel Fortier got his first NHL goal. That was good. It was an interesting game in the sense that Tampa showed you that even with the guys they have the know-how to come back in a game, to lock it down for a while, and then to come out a winner. And that means they could still go far in the playoffs.
Yeah, no, I mean, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, they have, a PhD in winning. Like, they understand what it requires in order to do that. And, Ken Holland used to say, when people would say, well, if it wasn't for the goaltending, he would have won. He goes, last time I checked, the goalie was on my roster. I have to pay him. They're part of my team. So why do we act surprised? They have a job to do, and they did it. So Vasilevsky, I couldn't agree more, though. I think he's the best goalie in the world. I remember my buddy Tom Laidlaw was an analyst for Russian KHL games, and I remember him calling me and saying, there's this guy coming over next year, and he's the best goalie I've ever seen, and I think he's going to be the best goalie in the NHL. Lo and behold, it didn't take long for Vasilevsky to become exactly that. And, it's not the spectacular nature of his goaltending, which he is capable of doing that now. And it's the consistency of his goaltending. On some of his best games, you don't even notice them because saves that would require Herculean efforts by other goalies, he makes look routine by just being in the right spot all the time.
Now, the 2 teams that are most intriguing that I think we will concentrate on here, One is the Florida Panthers, and the other is the Toronto Maple Leafs. Florida first. Right now they're 18-7-4. They've survived the departure of their head coach Joel Quenneville. They're getting excellent goaltending out of Bobrovsky, who after last year struggling and Dreger and then Spencer Knight sort of taking over during the regular season and the playoffs. Bobrovsky, I think, has been stable this year, and they're getting balanced scoring, and they made some additions during the offseason, Kev, that I think strengthen them. But the question is, are they strong enough to come up against a team like Tampa? That's the real test for these other two teams, are how do they match up with the champs. And I mean, I look at Florida, and I mean, I'm impressed with their depth and their quality, but that's going to be a question when it comes around April and May.
Yeah, I agree. And the big question is the one that we've always had for teams through the years, which is, have they done enough losing to learn how to win? Like we used to sort of believe that, you got to go to the playoffs and you got to lose a while. And so you got to go to school, you got to learn. You got to learn what is required by watching teams beat you and figuring out what it is that they knew that you didn't. And I do think that the loss of Quenneville will hurt them in the postseason.
Yes.
Quenneville understands and knows a lot about winning in the postseason. Brunette is a guy that's done a really good job, but he just doesn't have that level of experience in dealing with that. So I think that's a disadvantage. That's one area where that used to be a strength, and now we just don't know. Like, it's no different than Kevin Adams when, we just said he wasn't experienced. Like maybe he was going to be a good GM, but he wasn't the right guy now because he didn't really have the experience. It turned out Kevin Adams was better than we thought he was going to be. And maybe Brunette would do the same thing. But I don't know how you could not feel that the loss of Quenneville will hurt them in the postseason. He knows a lot about the Tampa Bay Lightning. He knows a lot about winning, and they certainly could use that in getting in the postseason. Otherwise, I thought it was a great test when Jokinen went out. They passed that test, in my opinion. They still look like a good team even without Jokinen. I think they're ready to go. I think their defense has been better than I thought it was going to be.
They have a lot of depth. They really do. Yeah. Throughout the organization, they have a lot of depth. They have center depth. They're good on D. Ekblad's healthy. There's still a lot going for them. A lot.
Well, defense is the area, Russ, that I question. I look at their forwards. I think their top six is excellent. I think they have some good role players playing in the bottom six. They have guys like Marchment and Lomberg who can throw the body around, and I think you need those guys during a long season and in the playoffs. Where I'm a little concerned about their depth is on defense. Ekblad's having a fantastic year. We know Uyghur has really become a much better defenseman over the last couple of years. To me, Gustav Forsling was somebody who fit the Quenneville system, who we had in Chicago. Gudis maybe a good bottom pairing guy. I don't know if they have the depth to go far. I think if Bill Zito is going to address anything before the deadline, it's going to be adding a defenseman. At least that's what I would do.
Yeah, I could see them, like, let's say Philly doesn't look like they're going to make a call for Ristolainen. I could see that happening. And, with no term on him, with him just being a rental, I think you could come up with a pretty good deal for him because they do have a lot of depth. And, let's say they send him someone like Logan Huchko, who's a fast up-and-coming forward, as an example. They could do that. Florida's got that in them. And at some point, Philly's going to have to make a decision whether they're in it or not, or whether they're extending Ristolainen or not. So if Florida looks there, that could really help them. Yeah,
I mean, it's Ekblad, Montour, Uyghur, Forsling, Gudis, and Kevin Connauton. So I think
no, Connauton's on Philly.
Oh, Connauton. That's right. I'm sorry. That's right. He got claimed. So, So Lucas Carlson.
We could use one more defenseman for sure.
Yeah. So, there's Kevin's having some Kevin's having some computer issues.
Yeah. Okay, we're back now.
Yeah, we're back. So, I mean, now Spencer Knight struggled. Some of us thought, and I thought it was reasonable to think that, he was going to take over as the goaltender. But I look at what Bobrovsky's doing. His save percentage is around .920. He's got let's see how many wins. He's got 12. It's 12-3-0.
It just seems like the threat of Spencer Knight at the beginning of the season woke Bob up. It did. Because he saw Spencer Knight play a playoff game last year, and that got him going, I guess, because he is a competitive guy, Bob, and so that was a big thing. Yeah, Spencer Knight will be back. We didn't know I thought he could do it. He's had a hiccup. It's no big deal, but it really did help Bob, I think, having that competition.
Well, not to dwell on what our previous discussion was, but. Do you think that the opportunity to make the Russian Olympic team was a motivator for Bobrovsky as well? I mean, there were certain players out there for Canada, for the U.S., for whatever country that they were motivated to play well so they could make the Olympic team. And now, the question is, some of those players, how will they react after the Olympics is not a factor anymore? How will they play now? Will it be a letdown and they'll go back to the way they were playing before? But I don't know, Kev. But I think that's an interesting point, because it's much like a salary drive sometimes is a motivator. I think that really was making the team. There were a lot of guys just scuffing that had made that part of the discussion. Like I really would like to show. I mean, it was a motivator for Jack Eichel to try to come back early because he wanted to play, in the Olympics. I got to give Russ some credit, though. The guy that I think actually has gotten better this season than I thought he ever would, and Russ was the first guy that pointed out that he thought he was just making big strides, was Uyghur on defense. Like, he's really turned into a hard guy to play against, very consistent player. Like every game you notice him out there, and he's really made a difference. But the one thing about Florida that I think also separates them, or at least puts them in a category with Tampa, is they have real difference makers. Like Ekblad over the last couple seasons has really stepped up his game. They have two goalies. If Bobrovsky's right, he's a very good goalie. And of course, Spencer Knight is a great young goalie. They got Barkov up front who, he could take over a series. He's that guy, a great two-way forward that, is going to help you both offensively and defensive. And he's hard to move out of the front of the net. So I just like everything about this team. And I think they're for real, even though I do think that the loss of Quenneville will hurt them.
Yeah, I honestly think that Florida, if they play Tampa this year, would beat Tampa in a series, and I think their center depth is what will do it.
Yeah, I think we've got to see who Brisebois gets at the trade deadline, though.
Sure.
Well, let's just say the big prize here, like last year when Carolina won the prize in that division, to win the division and avoid having to play Tampa in the first round, because in the Atlantic, whoever wins the division will not have to play either Florida or Tampa. If it's Toronto, like that 2-3 matchup in that division is going to be an absolute killer. And even if you win it, you're probably not getting out of the division because you're going to exhaust yourself getting past that other team. Now Toronto, they're having a really good year, 28-2. They're getting really good goaltending out of Jack Campbell. I think a lot of people didn't expect that to happen. They thought there would be a drop off there, or at least that Mrazek would be a factor in terms of being a 1B. But Mrazek got hurt in the first couple games this season, has pretty much been a non-factor until just recently. Austin Matthews got off to a slow start, has been really good now. He's catching up to Draisaitl in the Rocket Richard race. Tavares was playing great. Marner started slow. I mean, the core four of this team has, when they started out slow, it was all on the core not playing well, and their success is all based on the core playing well. Morgan Riley, after signing the contract, has had a big year. The question, Russ, is do they have enough depth past that core four?
Well,
And right now, go ahead. I'll.
Yeah, I mean, right now I think it's pretty good. I think they could add to it. I will say this: I'm more of a fan of going into the playoffs with Jack Campbell if he's healthy than any of the other goalies they've had before or Mrazek. So I think that could actually get them over the hump. Is just having a guy like Campbell with the way he's playing. Because I haven't seen Anderson play like Campbell's playing in years, except during the regular season. So, but I do like the depth. I think guys like Liljegren has been a tremendous advantage for them because maybe he did need this time. Maybe he needed all this time, but he is playing now. They do have some forward depth. I think you could add to it. It's easy to add bottom six forward depth at the deadline, and that's really all they need. They don't need top six forward depth. So,
well, okay. I think that
unless you're going to talk about moving Michael Bunting, Mike, which is an impossibility.
No, but right now, I think that there is not a sizable hole, but there is a hole on the left side in the top six. Right now, they're playing Alex Kerfoot out of position on the left wing with Tavares, and they're playing Bunting with Matt. Bunting has fit well with Matthews. He's getting a lot of points, but ideally. I don't know whether they want Kerfoot playing on the left wing. They really don't have a lot of size or a lot. Kerfoot's more of a complimentary guy.
He can play on the wing. I've watched him play on the wing.
He can, but I think they see an area where they possibly could improve. That's why, and I hope this doesn't happen for them. That's why I think they've been scouting Evander Kane in the American Hockey League. Their scouts were there, so that makes sense. That if they could find an opportunity to get him cheap, that they might be in on that. But Kev, where I think that they're going to look to add before the deadline is a right shot defenseman, because right now they've got Brody, they've got Riley, they've got Muzzin. They got a big hole on the right side on the second pairing. Right now they've moved Liljegren in there, and I think he's played well, but Justin Hall has really regressed. And that might be a guy that they look to replace or upgrade before the deadline.
Yeah, but it's interesting. Like, you hear so many people say, well, you don't want Evander Kane, you're just asking for trouble. But boy, if he was right, like, he's just what the doctor ordered for Toronto. What an addition he would be if they could bring him in and he didn't cause any trouble, if he just played like the player that he is. I think the Maple Leafs are close enough. They should push all in and get both of those players. I think they need to get one more tough physical forward and that defenseman to fill. And the same thing I had said with Colorado. It's in that position as well, where when you're this close, you got to go for it.
Well, there is an air, and I don't want to emphasize this too strongly, but I think there is an air of desperation when it comes to the Leafs right now, because honestly, I believe that if they lose in the first round again, Brendan Shanahan and Kyle Dubas's job are in jeopardy. And I think that means that, I don't think he's going to hold back. If they see an opportunity to add an impact player, that they would trade their first round pick. They have a first and a second next year, and then no picks until the 7th round. I think they'd trade their first if they got somebody they could fit in under the cap that could be of a real impact at forward or on defense. And I mean, I think they're right to do that, because you have Austin Matthews under a contract for 2 more years, Marner for 3, Nylander for 2. You've got to strike while the iron's hot with these guys, because you don't know how much longer you're going to have them.
What do you think they would give up for Ristolainen? He's a right-hand shot.
I think they'd give up their first round pick. I think
that may be a deal that Chuck Fletcher's willing to make down the line here. So,
yeah, and there's always
a guy who would that would be a big upgrade.
There's always been talk about them interested in, of course, the analytics people are having a stroke when they think of Ristolainen on the Leafs, because his analytics numbers are terrible, but they played against him enough times in Buffalo, and he's a tough son of a, so yeah, I think that would be a good fit. But
remember, on the cheaper side, Justin Braun's in the last year of a deal. He could still play defense. He's a right-handed shot, and he's actually gotten a few goals this year.
If they're comfortable with Liljegren on in the top 4, then that might make sense in terms of a bottom pairing guy. So I mean that's possible.
They have 2 guys. They have 2 right-handed shots.
Yeah,
probably they're probably not going to be keeping both in the future.
But Kev, the thing is, it's like just like last year when they got Kucherov back in the playoffs. Now, at some point in the second half of the season, Tampa's going to get Point back. They're going to get Kucherov back.
Yeah.
And like you said, Brisebois is probably going to find some magical way to fit some other guy in there. Maybe he trades for Ben Sherrod or whatever. Who knows? But, and they'll be extremely tough to go for the third Stanley Cup in a row.
Well, for sure. Like they will. The only problem I would say is all the good rental defensemen are left shots. I don't see anybody out there that's all that attractive, and they have the best left side going in my mind. So
Ristolainen is the best.
Ristolainen is a good one for sure.
Yeah, that's why I think Fletcher will be able to get a first round pick because the pickings are slim in terms of right hand shot. Defense.
Yeah, and if Toronto does go after him, they keep him away from Tampa. So and that just is only going to help them. But Tampa has all the ingredients yet again to do it. And even their depth, like they've plugged in some guys who are going to replace those guys. Not quite as good as Blake Coleman and Goodrow, but there's guys that are helping.
Yeah, Taylor Raddysh is doing okay. Barber is doing okay. Like they are good fill-ins, and at some point will be their guys, Kev. Like they will make that jump. They're just not going to probably make that jump this year. So you're right. You can fill in some of the gaps there.
I love an organization who, they have two of their best forwards are out, and their fallback on their number one power play is Corey Perry going to the front of the net, Anthony Cirelli, and Stamkos. Gee, you're really hurting.
Well, that's what I kept trying to tell people. And whoever was trying to say that Tampa would be in trouble, I'm like, Steve Stamkos is healthy. If they haven't had a healthy Steve Stamkos in years, that's going to make a difference. He's got 14 goals, I think. So,
Yeah, anyway. All right. Good job, guys. We will be back tomorrow with another edition of the Hockey Buzzcast. For Kevin Allen, for Russ Cohen, I'm Michael Agello. Thank you for watching. And remember, without the buzz,